Hi, welcome to this MG EVs video interview we're doing with Guy Pigounakis from MG. Guy has taken over a role at the start of this year as the, what's your actual job title, Guy?
Actually started in December last year. Not that it really matters. Commercial director.
Commercial director, right? Okay.
Yes, that's right.
So if you could just introduce yourself to the podcast and explain, previous experience and what your role means within MG, please.
Yeah, sure. I've been in the motor industry since 1977, would you believe? So you can probably have a fairly good stab at working out my age, I guess. Started off at Austin Morris, Austin Rover, and its various iterations. So you can trace my sort of involvement with MG right back to that sort of a period. Since obviously MG Rover, as it finished, obviously sadly went into liquidation. I spent 12 years, and that's my most recent job, I guess, apart from a brief period working as a head of operations at a dealer group. I spent 12 years as sales director of Hyundai Motor UK. In terms of MG specific, I was one of the 3 people who was responsible for the MGF launch program back in '95 with Jerry McGovern, who of course was the chief designer, and Brian Griffin, who's sadly no longer with us, who was the chief engineer. So yeah, I've got an awful lot of involvement with MG going back many years. The MGF Cup was something I managed, the Le Mans program, and of course the touring car program I was all massively involved in. So yeah, long time in the motor industry, and a very long affiliation with MG specifically.
I spoke recently on a recent podcast about the sales which MG have obtained this year, and how they've built year on year to greater volumes. Where do you see MG's position in the marketplace, and what are your ambitions for the near future?
Well, we're in a very difficult situation at the moment because the semiconductor issue, which is reasonably well publicized, certainly if you're in automotive directly, but of course it's affecting a whole range of industries, not just automotive. It's had such a massive constraint on the opportunity this year. And to be perfectly honest with you, we don't know where that's going to go next year. I mean, if you listen to some of the global experts in this subject, the chief exec from Intel and AMD, for instance, they're talking about this issue being with us until the end of next year. Now, call me a cynic, but I guess every time they say there's going to be a global shortage of semiconductors, their share price probably goes up by 30 or 40%. I couldn't possibly comment, but I think in automotive, we're now assuming that we will be supply constrained to one extent or another, probably deeply into next year. Having said that, we are very definitely in a much better position than most of our competitors, which is a great place to be. I don't think we're necessarily conquesting sales as a consequence of short supply in other manufacturers, but what it is allowing us to do is satisfy what appears to be an almost exponential growth in sales that we've experienced in the last 9, 10, 12 months. To be perfectly honest with you, it feels like sales are on fire for us at the moment. We're just about to finish the best September we've ever had. And we've actually even gone to the point of, well, we've done nothing to push sales this month, nothing whatsoever. In fact, we've been asking fleet customers if they'll delay handover of their vehicles until next month as well, because we've smashed all our targets this month already. And we've got probably another 600-700 cars to go during the day. So we're having an absolutely fantastic time at the moment. The growth is without precedent. It's looking continue to go that way. If we get the supply of vehicles that we hope we will, I'm pretty confident we'll end up with 29,000, 30,000 cars this year. And we haven't announced it yet to the press, but we have to our dealer network, as you know, because you were there. We're looking for 40,000 cars next year. And I'm very confident, supply allowing, we'll get there. And the supply allowing caveat is purely semiconductor related, because we have no difficulty in normal circumstances getting whatever we need sent to us.
That's one of the things I think I'm right in saying with MG, with their parent company's sake, is that they manufacture their own battery packs. They manufacture like almost every component of the car within the group. So they haven't got long supply chains like some other manufacturers. Is that right?
Yes, it's absolutely right. I mean, it's a vast industrial conglomerate. as I know you appreciate. That gives us huge economies of scale, gives us a R&D department, for instance, which is probably second to none in the world in automotive now, and it's building literally every single day. The batteries, yes, we're the largest manufacturer of battery electric cars in the world. But the problem is, it's not battery, it's not lithium, it's not cobalt, it's not battery manufacturer constraining us. Because if it was, that would only affect battery electric cars, of course. It's the actual semiconductors. We've got exactly the same problem as almost every other manufacturer out there. And as I said, some are affected far more severely than we are.
With regards to the sales success, a lot of that obviously has come from the new electrified models that MG's done. What aspects of the ZS EV and MG5 do you think has helped make it such a sales success? Is it purely price, or is it the fact that the range is bigger than others, or is it something else? Is it the style of vehicle? What do you think?
I think it's a bit of all of that and a bit more, to be perfectly honest with you. I think the brand's important, and I don't, when we talk about the overall success of MG, excluding battery electric specifically within that sector, which I'll come back to, I do think that the MG brand is a much loved brand. It's a highly recognized brand around the world, not just in the UK. And certainly lots of the customers we're talking to, corporate as well as individual retail customers, have warm, positive feelings about the MG brand. There's no negativity at all. So it's a brand that people are almost immediately receptive to, as opposed to having to sell the idea of what the sort of values that we're trying to live to are all about. In terms of battery electric, I've probably driven a quarter of a million miles in electric cars since they came out. I've been a sort of convert for nearly 5 years now, and I do a huge mileage. And I've driven a lot of different brands electric cars, because from a time when I was in charge of operations at a multi-franchise group. I've got to say, even in comparison to some of the much vaunted competition that you tend to see a lot of attention around and press talk about, the MG5 and the ZS in terms of drivability is every bit as good as those cars are, and they are significantly better value for money, both in terms of our retail price and in terms of the specification you get. So I think as a combination of the brand, the specification, and the drivability of the vehicles, coupled that to the sheer value for money, I think we almost own the genuinely affordable family electric vehicle niche in the marketplace. Bear in mind, of course, that so many electric vehicles are bought by user choosers on contract hire, because, of course, they've gone from 0 to 1% this financial year in terms of company car tax. And believe you me, that would save a company car driver an absolute fortune. And it does make me smile sometimes when I hear people talking about, the sort of move to green cars because of the environment. I am absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever, the biggest push on the move to electric cars is the company car taxation. We saw it with diesel. Yeah. We saw it with diesel. We're seeing it now with electric cars. And that's great, because the government recognizes the levers it needs to pull, and it's pulled those levers very, very effectively. We sell predominantly to corporate customers who want a specific electric car to do a job, and we sell to retail customers. And I think that's a big difference between us and lots of electric car manufacturers. We sell most of our electric cars to private retail customers, whereas most electric cars from most other brands are sold on contract hire as user chooser cars to corporates.
Yeah. I would say I agree completely with the company car scheme. I mean, I was talking to one of my friends from high school, and he was saying that he's now getting an electric car because he's going from paying, I think he said he's going to go from £350 a month to £20 a month on company car tax.
It's huge. It's like a massive pay rise, isn't it?
So it's like a massive pay rise for him, and he's getting actually a better specification of car. So,
and if you get fuel as well, like a lot of company car drivers do, you're into £600-700 a month net tax, going down to £15-20.
Yeah.
So it's an absolute, from a corporate driver, a no-brainer. And we are selling some cars like that to those customers, and we've got no problem selling to those customers at all. But the core of our market appears to be private retail customers at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Is there a date you have in mind for MG to transition to fully electric vehicles?
Well, obviously by 2030 latest. Obviously, government legislation in terms of the CAFE regs is making everybody look, every manufacturer again, look at where they are in terms of electric mix and the speed at which they're going to sort of increase the share of electric vehicles in their overall sales volume. And of course, as you know, I know you know, Miles, in terms of manufacturers in the UK, we have the highest percentage mix already of battery electric cars as a percentage of our overall sales, excluding people like Polestar, Smart, and Tesla, of course, who only build electric cars. So we're leading the pack, if you like, in that move towards electrification. I think we'll still be selling some petrol cars probably 2027, 2028. I'm not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest with you. The car that we'll launch next year will be only electric, so that'll be another big step towards our electrification. And I think to a certain extent, the speed at which we adopt 100% electric portfolio will be determined by the public's appetite for 100% offering of electric cars as well. So, in terms of government infrastructure for charging, in terms of taxation, there's lots of factors that will determine the final sort of adoption date of 100% green fleet, albeit 2030 is clearly the drop dead date for that.
I mean, is there anything in particular that you think will create that tipping point in the UK? Is it range on a car being over a certain figure? Is it the cost? Is it more down to a sort of whole thing, including, like, say, charge points and everything like that? Is that got to come
infrastructure is definitely a challenge depending where you live still, albeit it's suddenly become far less of a challenge in the current petrol. Don't know how to describe it. Debacle, perhaps, is the best word. And interestingly, we've seen a massive spikes on Google search, massive spike in terms of people searching electric cars. And I'm not saying I was feeling particularly smug, plugging in my car when I get to work and plugging it on my drive when I get home at night and not having to queue up at petrol stations. But it is quite nice all of a sudden to be sort of victim of a different sort of range anxiety, for want of a better way of describing it. Retail customers, it's interesting. Most retail customers, we call it cycle of use, are around 7,500, 8,000 miles now anyway. So, even excluding the pandemic lockdown periods. So a private customer's typical mileage is very, very low. So even a car with a sub 200 mile range, in reality, most people will need to charge it probably once every 10 days. So for normal use, for lots of retail customers, ordinary people, for want of a better description, don't mean that in a derogatory sense, for a sub 10,000, so sub 200 mile range car is actually perfectly adequate. But you can't break away from the requirement every now and then to have a long trip, whether it's for business occasionally or holiday or weekend away, what have you. So as a second car in the family, it's a perfect solution for those that can afford it. And then you get into the requirement of people having the longer range. And there is a security attached, an emotional security attached, I guess, with the longer range vehicles being available. But the biggest cost on an electric car by a huge margin is the battery. And the cost of those batteries is directly related to their capacity and therefore the range they can deliver. So that, for the foreseeable future, it's absolutely inevitable that as soon as you start putting range on batteries, then the price of those cars will go up quite significantly as a consequence. And that's a balance you have to strike. And there's no solution to that in the short, medium term that I'm aware of, certainly. For corporate customers, range is an issue.
Yeah.
And again, you have user choosers where the car is a perk of the job, for want of a better description, where they behave just like retail customers. So there's not a particular issue there. But for people that actually have to use their cars as a tool of the job to get their work done, then range absolutely is an issue, yes.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, I think in some ways it kind of goes hand in hand, because if you had confidence that you had access to charge points wherever you need them, if every parking space that you ever went to had a charge point, you wouldn't have the range anxiety even with a really small battery. So I've seen that in China, one of the best-selling electric cars has a range, it's got like a 10 kilowatt hour battery and a range of about 100 kilometers. Which,
yeah, well, if you live in Shanghai with the 35 million people there and 5-lane traffic jams in every direction, that'll probably keep you going for a couple of weeks. Because let's face it, the other thing people don't realize about electric cars is they're brilliant in cities. I leave my office in the evening with 220 miles on the range in my MG5. I have to change it for a long range one, obviously, shortly. By the time I get to the M25, having crawled through the traffic at the A40, I've still got 220 mile range,
Yeah.
and I've driven 15, 16 miles. So they're the complete opposite of an internal combustion engine that hates city driving but quite likes steady motorway driving. So yeah, for large metropolitan connotations, you can absolutely see there's no real need for massively long-range cars unless you've got no charging infrastructure, unless it's a real challenge to get your car charged, whether it's every day or even once every 10 days. That's the key to it from my point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that, manufacturers can do all they want, but if there's no infrastructure,
Yeah,
it's going to be a challenge for the retail customer to latch onto it.
it is. And it's great news now that lots of the chargers are contactless. You don't have to have these
Oh,
apps and muck around with that because, that was just a nightmare. I mean, I spent more time deleting apps and trying to reload them than I did using them. And now you can just, use your contactless card and you're charging your car. And that's long overdue as well. And that's a big, big help in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Does MG intend to cover more vehicle segments in the near future, with electric models specifically? Are we going to see an electric sports car or a small city car in the near future? Or?
Well, we'll certainly see a new electric car next year that competes in a segment that we don't currently compete in, and it will be an affordable car, and it will have a fantastic range and fantastic performance going with it as well, and that will compete in a very large segment of the market that we don't currently have an offering in. So in terms of incremental opportunity to us and our dealer partners, that's going to be a big step forward. That car will hopefully arrive, unfortunately not until Q4 next year, but it's an absolutely fantastic proposition, and hopefully we'll be showing a pre-production model to all our dealer partners at our January annual conference next year. Lockdown and all the usual caveats.
All the other caveats, yeah.
Flying, yes. But it's a very, very exciting car. It'll be, I think, and I hate using the expression because it gets horribly misused. I think it will be one of those game-changing cars for us in terms of, the sheer integrity of the product and the way we're perceived as a brand going forward. But again, it will be affordable. It'll have great range. It'll look absolutely fantastic, and it'll perform at the top of its sector.
I mean, obviously, we've seen a few concept cars come from MG. The E-Motion, and then there was the
Cyberster.
The one this last week as well.
Move.
That's it. Move it. Yeah. So, in terms of we're seeing some fantastic concept cars. Are they indicative of the sort of next steps for MG in terms of models coming to the UK?
I think you've got to be really careful with concept cars. I mean, when you've been around in the industry as long as I have, you can count the number of concept cars you've seen in your life on probably two fingers as to actually how many have made production in a version that looks anything like the concept car. I think what the concept cars do is they provide a platform to understand what the public responds positively to and negatively to, or perhaps are ambivalent about, whether it's the design of a light system, whether it's a seat design, whether it's the sort of the way that the dashboard interacts with the driver. All these things allow you to pick out elements of them to actually incorporate into future models. So would you ever see a car looking like Cyberster? Well, actually, you'd never say never. But it's probably pretty unlikely because you only have to look at the shape of that car and think, well, the cost of manufacturing the body panels for a start would be absolutely horrendous. And if you're trying to produce a car which is great value for money, then you don't need to engineer certain parts of it. But what it would do is provide a platform for when we're planning future products that are accessible and are affordable. That's not to say you'd never build something that looks like a concept car. It's just in my experience, I've very rarely seen it. What it does demonstrate, of course, is that, and from your own experience here, is that we have designers who are at the absolute top of their game, based here, and around the world. In Shanghai, we actually have right above me now is our styling studio in London, with 10, 15 absolutely top class vehicle designers in terms of interiors, exteriors, colors, etc., etc. And we have them in massive styling studios in Shanghai, and they're constantly working, not only developing cars that meet the latest trends in the automotive sector, but developing cars that will start to set trends in the automotive sector as well. So they are very much a statement of intent and capability, without hopefully people getting too hung up on the fact that, you know, they're all going to actually make it into production, because 99% of them won't.
No, that's fine. I mean, speaking personally and speaking probably on behalf of most of the people who watch this podcast, we probably get more questions about the emotion than anything else. So if there's anything you can do to put the word in Shanghai that, you know, if they want to put that in the product lineup anytime soon, that would then that'd be much appreciated. But
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because what when you're really enthusiastic about something, and it's great that the MG brand has the level of enthusiasm that it has. You know, you know, I'm sure the two biggest car clubs in the world are the MG Owners Club and the MG Car Club in terms of membership, which is phenomenal, really, and have been for a long time. You know, that enthusiasm, you know, you can't buy. It's developed over, you know, decades, and it's fantastic, and you know, we love it. But you have to sometimes, it's a bit like the motorsport, you have to look at what you'd like and what you think people would buy, and then you have to look at it and say, what are the commercial benefits of doing that? And often, you know, you can allow your emotions to get carried away with the reality. I mean, if we built a 50, 60,000 pounds four-wheel drive coupe, for instance, sadly, I suspect it would, you know, everybody would love it, the press would love it, you know, and everybody would say, isn't it fantastic? And we'd sell very, very few of them. And that's probably the reality of it, because every brand has a price ceiling over which it can't go. And if you go back to the good old, bad old days, whichever way you want to look at it, with products like the SV, for instance, so out of the old MG Rover, you know, I was around then. I was commercial director of Rover Group at the time. So I know exactly the history and story about that. And I think that really, really demonstrated that whilst you can sell lots of products up to a certain price band, and that can be, you know, quite an aggressive price band on occasion, all of a sudden you've got to be careful that you don't trip it over into a segment which is dominated by perhaps the Germans or the Italians in terms of sports cars, and indeed the Germans in particular in terms of prestige, premium, saloons, sports coupes, etc., because it's very hard to penetrate that market. Very hard, no matter how good your product is. You know, I could spend the next 2 hours talking to you about brands, global brands that have tried to do that and failed. The list is endless. You know, there's a couple more having another go at it today, as I'm sure you're aware. And it's interesting to see that one of them in particular has sold 2 cars to retail customers since they launched about 4 months ago. And, you know, there's a big gap between emotion and reality, and we have to sort of be careful that we don't put too much time, effort, and resource into building something that we all think is brilliant, and I can have as a company car because I don't have to pay for it, and everybody else thinks, oh, it's absolutely lovely, but no matter how much I really, really like it, A, I can't afford it, or B, that German premium brand is a safer bet, for instance. So we constantly have to weigh these sort of emotions and commercial realities up before we make a decision about what products we're getting. We've also got to be careful as well, because in terms of the environmental issues, you know, moving towards this 100% electrification, there's lots of cars that we build for markets around the world, which we could take into the UK today, but, you know, they would not cause us an issue from an environmental point of view, but they wouldn't support our sort of green credentials strategy, if you like, and our move towards building more and more green cars, electric cars. So it's a balance between the environmental issues that we have to take into account and should take into account, and the commercial reality of some of these new products that we constantly have to factor in. But yeah, we'd all like some of these cars, and you know, who wouldn't like to see an MG sports car at some point in the future? But you know, here's an example of the awful reality about sports cars. 2-seater open-top sports cars globally selling tiny, tiny numbers. And if you're not in the States, and we're not, then they sell in probably 20% of those tiny, tiny numbers globally. So commercially, they are extraordinarily hard to make work. Everybody loves them, but nobody actually buys them.
Yeah, I suppose that's why there's been quite a few types with Mazda and BMW, for example, or whatever, these different companies sort of tying up to, they can have one platform that they then put their own badge on it.
Yeah.
But I
I mean,
suppose
if you go back to mid 90s when the MGF came out, we were benchmarking the MGF against the Toyota MR2 primarily and the MX5 at Gaydon, doing thousands and thousands of miles around the circuit and what have you, of all the telemetry kits in it and what have you. It was great fun. In those days, in peak year of MGF in the UK, which was seen as the most successful small open-top sports car in its day, in the UK, we were selling just under 7,000 cars a year, and Mazda was selling probably 500-600 less than us. Then MR2 vanished, and you'd thought that we'd sell more cars. We didn't. And then we vanished, and you thought Mazda would sell more cars. They didn't. And that whole sector has just shrunk and shrunk progressively. And of course, in hot countries, everybody thinks everybody wants a soft top in a hot country. But in Southern Europe, if you drive around with the hood down all the time, you're going to get sunburned. So actually, it's a peculiar market which sells lots in the States, a reasonable number in the UK, hardly anywhere, any in markets like Australia, a few in Japan, and honestly, it's almost that. We just have a particular affiliation with the idea of a soft top car. You don't see very many drop head sort of C segment saloons anymore, and they used to be everywhere, didn't they? They've almost all gone, and that's basically because they're heavy, and there's not any, they're expensive, and there's not really a great demand for them, but everybody likes to see them.
Yeah, it's almost it ends up being a vanity project in a way, in that
it does.
Yeah, and
it does,
not commercial sense.
Yeah, and that was a bit like if you go back to the SV I mentioned earlier on, at MG Rover, it actually was a great car. Everybody was very excited because it used the Mustang engine. It was the first body-colored carbon fiber complete shell in production, and somehow, somebody neglected to see if there's actually a market for it, and of course there wasn't.
Yeah, I remember seeing it at the British Motor Show actually, on the stand there, and it was a fantastic looking car.
Yeah.
But like you say, everyone appreciates it, but not necessarily puts their hand in the pocket to buy it themselves. So I think that's
because you're faced with this awful sort of dilemma, aren't you? You're going to spend £60,000 on something in those days, which is probably 85 now. And do I buy that, which looks really exciting, but don't we know about it, or do I go and buy that Porsche, which is one of the best cars in the world, and everybody will think I'm how great I am and how successful I am in buying it, as opposed to this car which, well, I've got more question marks than answers over. And it was a great car. But it just demonstrated the brand ceiling in terms of pricing that exists, and every brand suffers from it or has that issue to address.
Yeah, MG has always been a value for money brand. Whether going back into the 70s, and the MG BGT, it was always about getting a really good driving experience for the money, and I think that's what it stands for today in my mind. That focus on value for money, is that going to shift as the brand grows? Are there going to be new halo products which will push the retail price higher?
I think you have to look at where your strengths are, and we have a USP in my opinion, and that is the affordability of our cars. I genuinely don't believe, electric or petrol, I genuinely don't believe there's a brand available for sale, or frankly anywhere in the world, let alone the UK, that can match the attractiveness of our cars in terms of value for money. Because they're cracking good cars, they look good, they drive extraordinarily well, they're really well built, they're reliable. So yeah, I think to walk away from a USP, which has undoubtedly helped us to re-establish the brand, not just in the UK but across the world, would be a foolish step. I think one of the challenges the whole industry is facing at the moment is that cars are going to get more expensive. They're going to get more expensive when the price increases of semiconductors filter through the system. Logistics costs are getting more expensive. The raw materials are getting more expensive. There isn't from food to white goods, everything at the moment is getting more expensive. And, we're being hit by transport costs, which have increased 600%. And we're being hit by massive increases in prices of components, like, no surprise to anybody, semiconductors. So these cost increases, I think the whole industry is on the cusp of starting to pass on to the customer. But we won't change our position in terms of pricing relative to our competition. All I'm saying here is that cars will have a price rise in the next few months. We will look into increase our car prices probably in January, and we're going to try and peg them to, as close to inflation as we possibly can. But there will be some additional costs built in because of logistics and semiconductors. I know the whole industry will price quite aggressively over the next 3 to 4 months as well. So yes, cars will get more expensive, but I don't expect our competitiveness to be eroded within that price increase. In terms of halo products and moving the brand up market, yes, obviously we're looking to expand the portfolio of cars that we sell, but we've got one car we're planning for next year, which is an all new car, coming in the very back end of next year, which I think will shock people just on the basis of its sheer attractiveness, its competitiveness, and its value for money. So whilst we're going to be building more and better and more exciting cars with every new car we bring out, we're not looking to shift away from our great value for money proposition.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Guy. It's been great speaking to you, and really appreciate you giving us your time and your answers, being so honest as well. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
And we'll hope to have another one of these interviews at some point in the future, perhaps this time next year, and we can say how many things we've got right, and the sales volumes hopefully have continued to grow. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Nice to talk to you.